Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guest today is David Plaza. He's the opinion editor and community engagement director at the Tennessean and USA Today Tennessee. David, 2020 was clearly the summer of social and racial unrest with protests and demonstrations, particularly after what happened with the George Floyd the killing. Now the police officer involved in that is on trial for both murder and manslaughter charges in Minneapolis. Are we on the precipice of another round of national unrest, depending on how this jury verdict comes out?
I've been following the trial very carefully, and one of the issues that has been taken up in this last week has been how Mr. Floyd died, and the consensus is that he died because of asphyxiation. And even one of the most unusual things is that even members of the police department have been testifying against Officer Chauvin. Certainly there's always the risk for this kind of unrest, but I hope it opens up opportunities to talk about what we saw was an effective lynching, on the streets of Minneapolis. And the hope is that justice is done. So if anything, it should open the opportunity for people to be more empathetic toward people's fears about over-policing. And that's not to say that, that we have many wonderful police officers and law enforcement who are dedicated, but when it comes to those abuses have to be handled, and they have to be addressed both at the citizen level and also at the policy level.
The Floyd trial has particular relevance here in Nashville. We have a former police officer standing trial on first-degree murder charges from a shooting of a black man during a chase a couple of years ago. An officer facing charges like that here in Nashville are unprecedented, especially first-degree murder. What do local officials and all of us need to do to keep things peaceful when that trial is over, to make sure what's decided doesn't turn violent or overly combative?
I think one of the things that we can do is help people understand how the court system works. For some people, especially many Black residents who have the experience of not seeing justice done, or perhaps being unjustly accused or convicted of a particular crime, there's the belief that the outcome will be set. So people are setting themselves up for some sense of disappointment. At the same time, Officer Delkey has a right to his defense, has a right to tell his side of the story. Daniel Hambrick is dead and can't tell that story. It is very unusual, because for the DA to choose to prosecute murder charges a police officer is something that typically doesn't happen. I've been covering this issue, and I've been looking into the Tennessean's archives about similar situations, and there was one in the 1970s where a young man was killed by police and nothing happened. And back then there were calls for police oversight board, and it took more than 40 years for that to happen in Nashville. And what I think officials need to do is really address this head on and not avoid the issues, even if there is a non-guilty verdict. There have to be addresses of how do you better policing. I see a lot of that happening now under Chief John Drake and the police blue ribbon panel that brought up several recommendations. So I am hopeful about that.
Mass shootings in recent weeks have been occurring again all across the country. Is President Biden wise to make those changes in that area through executive orders rather than trying to go through Congress, where his chances, particularly in the Senate, to getting legislation passed remain kind of poor? And in that regard, is it time to get rid of the filibuster, modify it, or just leave it the way it is to help protect the rights of the minority party in each member in the U.S. Senate?
It would be preferable if President Biden could work with Congress to get some legislation, although given the current environment, it's unlikely to happen. And the executive actions are very limited to certain types of weapons, certain types of casings, weapons that are ghost weapons, for example. It's not taking people's Second Amendment rights away, even though it's the opposition has posed it as such. And so I think it's important for people to understand what the executive orders actually are. It's a very sensitive issue anytime you talk about handguns and gun rights and so forth. But the preference would be for it to be taken to Congress. I read the op-ed this past week, I believe in the Washington Post, by Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, the Democrat who said he will not vote to weaken or to eliminate the filibuster. And his admonition to his colleagues was, Republicans, stop saying no. Democrats, start doing your work and work to compromise. And that's a hard pill to swallow, especially for people who are looking for some sort of action. Ideally, one of the things he warned against, which is very true, is that if you eliminate the filibuster, you have the temptation of having sweeping changes by the majority at the disadvantage of the minority, and the next time the minority is in power, that could happen again. But people are exhausted. People want some sort of action. I think at the very least to make sure that they know that people who shouldn't be getting weapons can get it in their hands. I mean, we even look at the Atlanta situation. You know, the shooter in the Atlanta killing of 8 people at different massage parlors and spas was able to get a gun the same day, and is accused of committing this heinous crime. You know, it was easier for him to get a gun than for him to register to vote in Georgia. And so that's one thing that we really need to look at.
Here in Tennessee, it seems every session of the General Assembly brings new laws being passed to expand gun rights. This term has been constitutional carry legislation, which Governor Lee just signed into law, which allows any adult over the age of 18 to carry a firearm, open or concealed, without needing any kind of training or a permit from the state. The governor says that will make Tennessee safer. What do you say?
Sure. I've taken the concealed weapons license course many years ago when the permitting was still in place. I don't think it's a great idea, and I think it's the age limit is 21 and over. But in any case, what I learned from that course is that we've talked more about safety in the law than we did about shooting. And yes, you know, people want to feel protected. They have a Second Amendment right to protect themselves. But you know, having policies that dissuade people from getting the training they need to be safe, because ultimately it's about responsibility. And I think what this does is takes the government off the hook when it comes to actually holding people responsible for bad actions. There are a couple of things that are interesting about it, which is, you know, increasing the penalties when it comes to people who steal guns. A lot of times there's recklessness with the way that people keep their guns in their car, because it is legal to keep your gun in your automobile. And I think we need to have a broader conversation about responsibility, which we didn't have. This was just about, you know, let people do what we think they have a right to do. Now, the governor has received some pushback as well from people who say it doesn't go far enough. This only applies to certain arms and not to all arms. And I think that the House leadership has said that they do plan to incrementally address those other weapons as well in the future.
David Plaza is a Tennessean. He's the opinion editor and community engagement director there, along with USA Today Tennessee. Back to continue our conversation with David after you watch these messages.